Hey guys, Mrs. Karaz here. We're in chapter 21, and today we're looking at section 2, supporting the war effort. Alright, so once the U.S. joins World War I, we need to actually gather enough troops to send overseas to fight. At this time, we had a very large navy. I remember us talking about that last chapter, but a very small army, maybe around 125,000 men. So it was necessary to make a really concerted effort to mobilize or prepare for war. Many men are inspired to join this war and fight with the Allies, so many volunteered for military service, but the men that did volunteer weren't enough. We needed more manpower. So at this point, the Selective Service Act is passed, and this act requires that all men ages 21 to 30 must register for the military draft. Women were not a part of the draft at this time. Many volunteered for service as either nurses or administrative assistants, and these were actually the first women in U.S. history to hold official rank. African Americans faced discrimination during the war, as they did, in peacetime here, but they volunteered anyway to fight. W.E.B. Du Bois thought that joining together with white soldiers would help African Americans gain equality, right? If you stand alongside them, if you're fighting alongside them, you're fighting for the same cause that they are, how could they say you're unequal? How could they deny you your rights? You're proving that you are entitled to all the rights that they are. So looking at the people in the Army at the time, about a quarter of the men who were drafted into war were actually illiterate. They did not know how to read or write. So that meant that officers in the war had to educate their men on topics including literacy, nutrition, personal hygiene, patriotism, and of course armed combat, right? We have to teach them to fight, but we also have to teach them these other basics to make sure that we have the most successful soldiers we could possibly send out there. Alright, so when we're in a war, right, our resources are going to be stretched thinner naturally, right? Not only do we need to provide for the people here at home, we need to provide for the soldiers going overseas to fight. So one thing we're worried about is ensuring that there's enough food to go around, right? Seems basic enough. So President Wilson chooses Herbert Hoover, to run a new food administration. And basically Hoover's job was to ensure that enough food was being produced to feed American civilians and the troops. So in order to accomplish this purpose, he really urged Americans to either save up or cut back on food resources, right? Eat a little less. Don't go for that second helping. Save it. Eat your leftovers. Do what you have to do to make sure that there's more food that can be sent overseas for our soldiers. There was also a Victory Garden campaign where Americans were really encouraged to plant and grow their own fruits and vegetables, eat their own fruits and vegetables, and then you don't have to buy any of the food that's being mass-produced. That food can go to the soldiers, right? So if you grow your own garden, you're helping ensure our victory in the war, was the idea. So, obviously food resources aren't the only ones that are going to be necessary. Some industries at this time were flooded with requests for goods. Rifle factories, which seems obvious, sock factories actually were pretty inundated at this time as well. So we need to make sure that the goods that we need are being produced and given priority. So Wilson sets up a new agency called the War Industries Board, or WIB. This board was led by Bernard Baruch, and basically they told industries what to produce, how much to charge, and how to use scarce resources to make sure that we were really using everything that we had to the most, logical purpose, where the soldiers' needs need to be met first. How do we do that? Alright, so we've got these goods that are needed, but who is going to produce them, right? The fact is that there were not many workers around at this time. Because first of all, we have men off fighting in the war, right? So if you have to go overseas and fight, obviously you're leaving your job behind here. Immigration also slowed down drastically, so we didn't have many new people coming into the country to take on these jobs. Think about it. If you're a country in war, it's probably less likely that, outsiders will want to immigrate into your country because there's a threat involved there, right? There's a draft. There's a lot that's undesirable about living in a country during wartime. So, how do we fill these vacancies in jobs? Many business owners turn to women and African Americans, right? And although the circumstances aren't great, it's a good thing because African Americans and women are given access to positions that they would not have been permitted to take on previously, right? And just like we were seeing with Dubois' suggestion, right? By holding these jobs that, white men who are well respected take on, you're proving you can do the same work. You're proving that you are capable in the same way that they are capable. And it's, shooting a hole in the arguments of people who say that you're not as good and you're not as equal, right? You're showing that you could do the same stuff. So why don't you deserve the same respect? So now we've got the systems in motion, right? We're conserving food, we're conserving resources, we're producing what we need to produce. But we also want to boost morale in our country, and we want to inspire people to feel like we're going to do well in the war. We know that matters. So Wilson creates the Committee on Public Information at this time. And this committee recruited men to travel around the United States giving patriotic speeches. They produced pro-war cartoons and posters, including Uncle Sam, who is the gentleman that you see here. And all of these were inspired to help people feel good about America and our role in the war and want to contribute to the war effort, right? But it can't all be positive, right? So we want to boost positive feelings, which is what we saw on the last slide. We also want to shut down any negative feelings, right? So we have two laws passed at this time. The Espionage Act of 1917 is one of them. Espionage is essentially spying. And the Sedition Act of 1918. And sedition is any speech or behavior that's really rebelling against the government or questioning the authority of the government. So these two laws, obviously put in action during the war, gave authorities the right to close newspapers and arrest people who spoke out against the war. This really seems in violation of the First Amendment, but we're going to look at the Sedition Act in particular in class, and we'll talk about its necessity, air quotes, and why it was put into place at this time anyway. So moving on to the next piece. Bottom line is that personal freedoms were sometimes stifled in the name of the war. The American Protective League, among other organizations, went through people's mail and tapped phones just to ensure that there were no foreign spies in our midst. So we're seeing that there are many different facets to the war effort here in America, and we'll see how that contributes to future battles and our actual role in the war in our next slide. Thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon.